Okay, in this video, I'm going to try to address, this is another part of my solar videos that I kind of promised. There's a different reason I promised that. I was actually going to make this into some sort of official class, and then I thought, okay, it didn't quite work, so I'm just making them anyway. And in this video, we're going to discuss the financing. Now, when we discuss the financing, we're going to have to discuss resource analysis. So I'm going to put debt financing in. And what's interesting about debt financing, and I hope you agree, is I have my trusty little term sheet that I love so much, but there are two different ways to finance debt, and let's see if we can incorporate these sorts of debt financing into our projects and understand just a couple of these issues. The first issue is the bank says representing no more than. Now, solar might well be 85% debt. And exactly how you compute the debt to capital and how much debt you're going to put in and how you measure the cost of the project might be a very big issue. But that's the first criteria, but we're not finished. Then I always kind of go straight down to the debt service coverage ratio, and it's almost, and I missed it. And I'm not going to miss it too much anymore because I've gone here so much. And then it defines the debt service coverage, the ratio of revenues received during the period, blah, 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 over all expenses, minus really all expenses, divided by interest and fees and other financing costs and scheduled payments. Now, when you actually look at this, the financing costs don't include the letters of credit on the debt service reserve account. So exactly how you, well, they don't typically at least. So exactly how you define that can be a little tricky. And then we have the big provision. And the big thing that I keep wanting to emphasize, and that's that the minimum and average, it could be different. If the average could be higher and you could have a higher debt service coverage at the beginning. In the base case financial model shall be no less than 1.35 when using P50. So we have a financial model and a P50. And then it will also not be less than 1.0 when using a P99 1 year. They shouldn't put P50 1 year. This is a mistake, of course. I say of course. So in order to understand the financing and kind of do the last piece of our cost analysis, I don't even want to call it levelized cost. I want to call it real cost analysis. To get that last piece, we're going to put in the financing, and we're going to understand how to get a P50 and a P99 from more of an economic and finance perspective. I'm not going to suggest we're going to really do a whole resource analysis and do all the engineering and do all the sizing of the inverters and everything else. But in the context of looking at this, we're going to evaluate this. Now, when we look at, let me go to the PowerPoint slides, perhaps. Okay, so when I'm going to maybe just work through a little bit of this P50 and P90 analysis. And I'm going to try to cover it reasonably quickly and just have you know enough to ask questions and to be able to make comparisons and to be able to evaluate some of the real risks and uncertainties. Now, when we say P50 versus P99, I used to be very interested, I am still, and very adamant about all the statistics that go through that. But what we're really just doing is saying, here's a downside case on the resource, and we're using some judgments. At the end of the day, like any other downside case, there are going to be some judgments involved. And we're going to show you how that works, and in particular, how if you put some different judgments into your analysis, how the putting standard deviations and downside elements, you can put them together and get this P99. That's all they're really doing. And when they're doing this, they're adding standard deviations. So we're going to show you a little bit how to kind of get and look at some issues surrounding solar uncertainty, these PV cyst models that nowadays even have a little a graph of the uncertainty. And at the end of the day, I'm going to show you a little bit of a simulation, a Monte Carlo simulation, demonstrating why when you add standard deviations together, if the things are independent, a big if the factors that cause the downside case, like low sunlight, errors in modeling, errors in estimating some of the factors that go into this performance ratio that we'll discuss. If you do that, you instead of adding you cannot add standard deviations. You have to square each standard deviation, sum those squares, take the square root. That's called mean squared error. And when I saw that, I couldn't remember it from statistics classes forever back when, and I had to prove it with a Monte Carlo simulation. So we're going to do those things. And then I'm going to promise to put this file on, because we're also going to discuss just a little bit on how you might make your P50 case and at least understand just a little bit what's in the PV cyst analysis, and understand I've got a little case study from Texas in the US where you get completely different, for some studies where we get performance ratios that are just all over the place, and how do you interpret that and at least ask questions about that. So that's what we're doing. But before we do this, let's go back to our LCOE analysis and finish it up. Now, to finish it up, what I did was at the very bottom here, I put a target equity IRR. I used a low one. If you want to argue with that, you can, but I've got to tell you that when the interest rates are practically negative, and if you've got a safe solar investment, especially after it's mature, people will accept a relatively low IRR. Of course, if it's at the beginning of the project, you might want a higher equity IRR, and I suppose that's a subject for a different day. Let me put some more kind of, maybe I'll just put a couple of extra tenors in here. We'll put the debt tenor in. Now, that is a very big subject in LCOE and a very important subject because in reality, you're probably going to refinance many times, and the tenor might, in the real world, go all the way to the life of the project, which really brings me to an issue that you could, when you do your LCOE analysis, you could either, when you compute your target IRR, you could do it using one method, and your required IRR could be an after-tax weighted average cost of capital, meaning you'd have to put the debt cost in after tax, and you just use the IRR. Now, I've got other videos on this, and I've got other financial model proofs. But in today's session, really, I'm going to work through the financing using our famous little thing here. Now, for a solar project, it's probably going to be maybe let's put in 1.25, and let's put in a P99 of 1. Okay, so let's go down here, add some things to our project. Now, okay, let's put a P50 DSCR, and for now, it would probably be somewhere around 1.2 for all our solar, and it's going to be, of course, less relevant for the other stuff. And when we go to the wind, it might be 1.35, like I showed you. And for the battery, we'll leave it like the solar, because it would be very often the case where you'd finance the whole thing together. All right, I think I'm just going to copy this. I'm sure there'll be some mistakes here. And then we can put our P99. Now, in Europe, they'd be more sensible maybe and use a P90. P99 is the absolute worst case. And if it's a 1-year P99, this is one of the most confusing things ever. A 1-year case includes everything. It includes the short-term fluctuations, 1 year. 10-year averages out the fluctuations, those short-term fluctuations. And in wind, that's particularly important. In solar, it's much, much less. So for now, I'm just going to put DSCR, because this is more of a solar analysis, and we'll make this 1.0 here. Now, if you, I know I've said this before. I didn't mean to do that. If we have a DSCR of 1.2, this implies, if we take DSCR minus 1 divided by DSCR, it's the old, how much can the cash flow go down? The cash flow can go down by 16%, and we still pay off the debt. So if we have all variable costs, no fixed costs, and we have a reduction a reduction of less than 16% in our P99 case, the P50 case should be in place, because 16%, 16.67% is more of a reduction, and it's a worse kind of conservative case than the P99 case. So if we take the P99 and put 1 minus this case, and if there were no fixed cost, we'd say an 84%. Now, the problem is there are a lot of fixed costs often, and that means if there are some fixed costs, the reduction in the production multiplied by revenues you subtract fixed cost, then it's, if we have a reduction, let's say, of 85%, or a reduction of even 12% or 13%, we might get more of a reduction in cash flow, and then the P99 will come into play. So what we're going to do is put debt into our analysis and try to really finish off our analysis. And I'm going to make this the maximum debt to capital, and it could well be in solar that we would see something like 85%. Okay, so we're really focusing right now on the solar, and what I better put 8% here. I think that's very, very high, but I don't want to get anybody all worked up. And what I want to really say is, when you work with real clients, I'm sorry, they probably don't even look at any of this project IRR stuff. They're totally obsessed, and rightfully so. When I go through the theory, when I go through the real theory of project finance, when you get a financer to put money in your project, that's an immense signal. It's a stamp on your passport that says this is a reasonable project. And it's very reasonable to say, okay, let's account for the financing, and let's realize that getting financing and having somebody else put 80% of the money in the project gives a very, very important signal that we've got a good project. This is all a little bit blah, blah, blah. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go through step by step in this analysis. It's very, very possible. It's very, very possible that this will take me a long time, and I get absurdly nervous about these videos and this little class and all of that. Why would I really? We're going to finish. We're going to kind of really finish off the LCOE. Now, I also want to show you something else, and that is that in the in my website, I've changed the LCOE and changed it around a little bit based on what we've done. So I have different discussions on how to incorporate inflation, degradation, taxes, replacements, and construction timing. So replacements, for example, I go through, what method you should use, and we have some simple examples to work through it. And I hopefully in this on the website can really kind of explain step by step what to do. Now, if I'm obsessed with some of this levelized cost, I'm sorry, but it's really going through the whole economic analysis, in our case, of a solar project. And later I'll be talking about how to go step by step slowly through a battery analysis. Now, we have one kind of thing to do, and we should put our construction timing in here. And when we put our construction timing, it might take, for all the solar and all that, let's just put 1 year. Okay, but then when we go to, and certainly for batteries and other stuff, probably is going to be less, but let's put 2 years in for a combined cycle, 3 years in for coal, maybe let's put 1.5 years for this, maybe 1.5 years for wind. Okay, and we should really, if we're going to do a comprehensive analysis of this, the construction timing should be included. And when we, hi Kenny, that's the fast man. Okay, when the construction cost is included, then we can put a construction factor. And again, this I'll just for now do it on the nominal, because in our model we'd really have to start then putting a construction period and a operation period and do all our timing and everything else. But if you want to include this in the analysis, here just mechanically what you do, you take your regular old IRR before all this adjustments, and then you put the construction period, and then you put a minus if we're going to use just a simple straight line S curve. We're going to put a 1 divided by the construction factor. Okay, and when we do that, when we do that, you can see that in this case, when we had 3 years, we should increase the construction cost by 10%. Now, this doesn't only, by the way, this does, if you do a true levelized cost analysis, it doesn't only impact the it's not only the IDC, it's not only the I don't care, it's not only the interest during construction, it's also the equity cost during construction. You could think about it as financing all of the equity with a shareholder loan, and the shareholder loan has the overall interest rate, and that should increase. But in the old days, when you I said old days, there was something we used to compute called allowance for funds used during construction, and we included the equity cost when we included the regulatory cost of an asset with a long construction period. Okay, so that when we finally compute our cost, we should account for the construction factor as well as everything else. Now, I just want to make sure we cover everything. So if somebody starts saying, you didn't include this, your LCOE isn't absolutely complete, that's the real reason I did this. And then let's go, and what we're going to do to evaluate the financing is we're going to this time go to the financial model. Now, as I said, one way to do it would be, let's even show you that just in case. So if you wanted to, it's more of a corporate finance approach, and it's really a better approach, and we could confirm this with the model. So if you put the cost of debt, and where's our, this time I'm going to move our income tax rate right way kind of at the top, and then we can put a percent, and let's say our cost of debt right now is 3.2%, which is arguably high. And then what you do is put the after-tax cost of debt. And by the way, you use the after-tax cost of debt in your model. And I know these days that there's a limit on the interest sometimes. So these things, okay, you could kind of make an argument that it's not exact, and okay, and maybe that's right. And this LCOE will get you just about everything, but those little things, and we might have to make a little adjustment. We could even adjust this, and then we'd have our required. We'd have our our debt to capital, and then we put a percent. Now, as we do this, we're going, and then let's put our equity target. How about I'll call it target equity IRR. And that target equity IRR is really just, what did I have? 7.5% maybe this time. I'm changing it. Okay, that's the definition really of the cost of capital. And then we could have our weighted average cost of capital, and we just put, and this assumes, though, this will assume using economic and not straight line or tax or any other depreciation, using economic depreciation, which is the change in the value of the project, the change in the economic value of the project over time after tax. We can prove that that is how you're going to get the implied repayment of the debt, and it's going to be a little different than all the sculpting and everything we're going to do in this next example. But all we would do there is take the after-tax cost times the debt percent plus, times the debt percent plus the equity cost times 1 minus the debt percent. And we can use that in the LCOE. And that's where we get these kind of remarkably low, and they really are. Here's why they're really low, because once we use that number in our, why did I get, just a minute. Oh, I had a different tax rate here. I had no tax rate, so that's why this one's a little different. Okay, I'm gonna maybe put a little line here. We could use this as our overall required project IRR, and this implicitly assumes that we're going to refinance and refinance and refinance until we hit the economic life of the project. Or you could say it's like a corporate finance, and I've heard people say, corporate finance is kind of unfair because they're getting lower costs, and that's why some of these offshore wind could be financed by corporate balance sheet instead. But it's really just two ways of doing something similar, and I found that people want to see it with project finance. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this in now. Now we'd have to also, by the way, down here, put the same kind of construction factors in on a real basis. Okay. And I'm going to, for now, just we're just gonna leave those out for a minute, because you've seen how to do those, and I just really included that to make and what we would do on the real basis instead of using the nominal IRR. And remember what the real analysis is. That's the best economic measure of the cost of our solar project. If we use we'll just do the same formula here, but use the real IRR instead of the nominal IRR. I was just about to do it. It's the FV formula, and I'm not going to do it for once. Okay? Now, let's go to our financial model and start incorporating a little of this stuff in here. Now, I guess I'm going to leave some of this. I forgot that I already had some of it in here. And what we have is we have already defined our capital expenditures. Now, I've gone through modeling so many thousands of times that I don't want to kind of repeat myself. This IDC is almost as if we could put in that construction factor. And if you get somebody who's just saying, I don't want to bother with a financial model, I just want to compute our what you might call a closing cost. You could do something like that with that little FV factor. And I'm leaving this, and I should have put the SRA. Sorry about that. And then we can put the debt amount in with the assumed debt to capital, but that might not be the amount of debt, because it's very possible that we're going to be constrained by the DSCR. So we'll but let's start with that just to get the mechanics of everything down. And then we put the repayment period, and whenever you have a repayment period, you're going to make a little flag. You're going to say, okay, let's take the period of the model and make it less than or equal to that repayment period, and then we put the interest rate in, and then we can, now I'm going to change things a little bit. Okay, and now let's show you just a little bit on how we might evaluate different debt issues, and how we might evaluate the financing of the debt issues. Let's first put our cash flow at P50. And now what I've done here is cheated a little bit, actually maybe a little bit of a lot. And let's use the after-tax cash flow, but that's not really the after-tax cash flow. The true after-tax cash flow is the cash flow after all the interest. So we're going to put that after-tax cash flow in, and I think the reason this cash flow is changing and has a different little pattern is in the last session we talked about the tax depreciation, and we used a accelerated tax depreciation, but we've also got inflation, so we've got a funny looking kind of thing. And then you can put below that you can put the DSCR at the P50 case. And let's put target debt service. At P50. Okay, and just go and get I find what I'm just going to do now really kind of boring, because I've done it so many times. And if we don't have taxes, and if we don't have fees on a letter of credit and some other complications, this is actually very simple. And you just say, okay, that's the amount of debt we can have at the P50 case. Now, I'm going to I opened another model I'm just working on, and what this model has is a series of different real projects. It's on the website, in the chapters. And we did the different ones, the different projects, and for each project, they did a debt sizing from a P50 case. And the debt sizing, I believe this debt sizing used a DSCR of, I can't remember right now what it was, but I think it was 1. It can have been 1.5. Is it really? Huh. Yes, it was really high. Okay. Huh. I'm going to close that file. Usually I would see something much more like 1.2. And then we put the NPV of the debt service at the interest rate. And in reality, the interest rate is not constant, but we'll for now assume that. So we have an interest rate of 3%, and we put NPV at 3% of all of the cash flows. And then what we do is we get an enormous amount of debt, which is way, way higher than the debt from the debt to capital. And I suppose, oh, well, that's because I made a crime and I didn't multiply my cash flow by the period, but we still get more. All right, and then now let's start talking about how you might do a P90 case. And if we have or P99, let's say it's a P99 case. Now, in the slides that I need to go over and need to talk about a little bit more slowly, we're going to go through the resource analysis on a step-by-step basis. We're going to talk about what different kind of radiation is, how the tracking can affect the output. We're going to talk somewhat about the performance ratio and how to interpret one of these things, and how the performance ratio is affected probably more than anything else normally by the temperature, and then work through some of these temperature coefficients. And then we'll go through this case study in Texas, where I got very, very different numbers depending on, not numbers for the initial solar resource, the initial resources that hits the solar panel, but the performance ratio, why we get different numbers, which leads you to say, how do we start accounting for uncertainty? And when we account for uncertainty, the big deal and the big thing we will want, and we're going to go through where the uncertainty really might come from and how people measure these different uncertainties. And the thing we're going to use right now, let's put a 5.8% in for a total uncertainty. You notice that this 5.8%, if I add 3 and 2, that's about 5.4, and 4 is 9 point whatever. I'm sorry. That's not the 5.8. That's because you use this mean squared error. What you would do is square this one, square this one, square this one, add up the squares, take the square root, and you get the 5.8. But for now, I want to show you how you're going to use this 5.8. We'll use that uncertainty. So let's put the in solar, and then I'll discuss it a little bit more, but I want you to remember mean squared error and norm inverse. So let's put that as a percent. And it was 5.8, right? Or it wasn't 5.4. Was it 5.4 or 5.8? 5.8. See, I remembered it vaguely. Okay, and then we put our 5.8% in, and then we can put our P50. Either we can use a yield or a capacity factor. Remember, I hope I've gone through this. A yield and a capacity factor measure exactly the same thing. If I haven't said that before, I'm saying it now, and I will say it again. Yield is KWH divided by KWP. Now, what did we use up here? We used a capacity factor, and we had a capacity factor of 18%, maybe not really high. So let's put our capacity P50 capacity factor. And let's put that percent in, and let's go upstairs and get that number. And then if we want, we can put P50 yield, and we can go either way, and that's going to be KWH divided by KWP, and it's really annual, but everything's annual, so we multiply that by 8760, like everybody, not 8766, and we get our solar yield. And that, if you remember or don't remember, that's up here, we got the capacity factor or the yield. Okay, and now let's start doing this. So we would put standard deviation. Now I don't know why they have to call it uncertainty, and let's use yield. Standard deviation, and what we would just multiply that. That's not standard deviation of the yield, but let's put standard deviation of yield. We could do it with capacity factor just as easily. Okay, and then now this is the big deal. If I could spell yield right, then we can put P90 yield, and then we'll okay, and we'll put the same units in, and I suppose I'll do it with yield here just to be different, but what we'll do is we'll put in our capacity or generation as the KWH divided by KWP. We can put a degradation in, and you could even put a standard deviation around the degradation, but that's a little bit different than the pure standard deviation of the yield. And then we'll get a lower generation, and then we'll have to put our OPEX in and our price, and we'll get a cash flow. We'll have to basically go through the whole thing and get a cash flow for our P90 case. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to walk you through it, but you can see hopefully the key numbers, and so I'll of course switch off the video. And then the big numbers, we use norm inverse, and we put, if we wanted let's put, how about we'll put let's insert a line and then put probability level, and maybe this time let's make it 1%. So that means that we would put 1 minus the this in, okay, and we'll put probability come on, how about probability above. Please don't start yelling at me about my typing. I'm sorry about that. All right, and then once we have that, or my spelling, I'll fix that later. There's a spell check in Excel, I think I discovered that. And then we can put our P production. How about I'll just call that our downside production. Now, I hope or how about I'll put downside yield. And let's just put our number here. And we'll put norm inverse. That's what I was showing you. And then what we need to do, no, not norm S inverse, norm inverse. Just the regular old one. And then we put our probability in, but you put the 1% probability, not the 99%. You put the mean, and then you put the standard deviation. And then it gives you the downside case. And we could even here, if we want, we could put P99 divided by P50. Now, in that, I should have left that other thing open. I should have left the other file open because there were projects, and I might have it. Here. Just a minute. I think I have it. Okay. These were all projects in the same sort of area. This Oxford was not Oxford in the UK. And they talk about the different, what kind of program they use to compute the solar yield. And here we've got Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Massachusetts. This one had 4.5 and this one had 6.7. That might be a good contrast. And I have no idea. I know them. Yeah, I know them. But maybe it's a little far away. Who knows? Why you get differences. Let's take the biggest deviation, which is Chippewa Falls. I did some consulting work there. I remember I missed them. 6.7 versus 4.3. Let's just see what happens if we use the two different levels of production. So so let's say it's 6.7. And if it's 6.7, then if we take our P99 case and divide it by our P50 case, we get 84. But if it's 4.3, I think that was the lowest, then we get only a difference of 90. Now, if you put 6.7%, it's very likely that the cash flow, especially if we're using some kind of DSCR like 1.2, the cash flow, the downside case, will be driven by the P99 case. If you use the 4.3, 90 is, remember, if we take, I'm going to do that again, sorry, 1.2 minus 1 divided by 1.2, that's without any fixed cost. That says that we have a implicit downside case in our DSCR that will allow the cash flow to go down by 16.7, and if we have 1.0 at P90, we'll get a different result. Now, right now, actually. But this is because we have a very high IRR. Let's go into our case and put some much more reasonable kind of project return. When we have a lower project return, now the NPV at the discount rate of the debt is less when we use P50 than when we use the 85% case. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to adjust the debt to do it. Okay, Kenny. I don't know why it keeps coming back like that. Fast. Flexible, accurate, whatever it's structured, transparent. Oh, brilliant. He came up. He's awesome. Okay, now, so I'm gonna switch off the video, and now what we're gonna have to do is kind of do our whole little analysis with the P90 case, or P99 case. And then we're going to also get the NPV of the debt service at the interest rate, and then we're going to select the lowest one. So I hope you see why I'm going through some of these issues on a step-by-step basis. I am not going to have time to get in a little more detail into the performance ratio and variations in the performance ratio and why you might have some of these different downsides. And I probably made a video at some point about this, but I think it's worth going through this step by step and seeing what that means squared error. So that's going to be the next video. And right now I'm going to have to pause this for a minute. Okay, I just I'm restarting because my Excel just crashed. Nothing because of anything we have, any formulas we have here, I assure you. Now, when we do this, what I did is went upstairs and saw how we computed the capacity factor, degradation, OPEX, down to after-tax cash flow. And we basically have to mimic this. We're only changing the generation, but we're going to have some fixed OPEX, and we're going to have some taxes that are driven by the cash flows, and the fixed OPEX will aggravate the downside in the cash flow. So, first thing I did was, remember we did the norm inverse function. Formula text maybe. Why it always comes up. Formula text. Okay. Because I want you to remember that one little function, and then when you see the standard deviations here, you can apply them. That's why we really have to understand what's in this standard deviation, and if it's just an arbitrary kind of downside, maybe we're just as well making an arbitrary downside. Okay. We don't have to be some statistical or engineering expert for this necessarily, especially when we see the stuff that's really underneath this. So we put in the capacity, and then the capacity factor is this divided by 8,760. I'm starting to repeat myself too much, but capacity factor and yield are the same, measure the same thing. So we multiply it by the generation, take account of our degradation. We could put a downside in our degradation as well, but we'd have to it would be difficult to put that. We'll see that in this Egypt case study when they put the solar uncertainty case study. They put these factors together and they put degradation uncertainty as the biggest one. And I think that should be kind of outside of the process. They just throw some random crap in here when you really look at it. Okay, just to get a downside case that they can say, we did some analysis. That's what I think. Maybe I'm wrong. And then we get our Ebitda, which is the revenues minus the OPEX. We take the depreciation from upstairs. We don't have to mess with that. Our EBIT, our taxes, and I'm going to leave that as negative. In reality, there would be a tax loss carry forward, and nowadays there are some constraints on the tax carry forward in places, and there might be a minimum you'd have to address, and then we get our final cash flow. Okay, and then once we have this, now I'm back with you. Then let's put I guess Okay, I'll repeat the cash flow. Why not? And what we're going to do is this time multiply that cash flow by our flag for the debt repayment period. So this time, oops, do I have the formula set? I don't know how that happened. Okay. And this time the cash flow stops at the end of the debt service period. Then if we're going to take our P99, we really, in this sheet, we're starting to have just about everything really defined. And I don't know if you remember, we put the index function in there and blah, 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 blah. So we'll just take this and divide it by this. It would be possible perhaps to put a different P50, and then you take the NPV, and let's go up and kind of cheat and find our 3% rate. And we take the NPV of all of our debt service starting here. And I might have, and I wouldn't be surprised if I made an error here, because the NPV of the debt service, I didn't make an error. It has to start at the repayment period. Perhaps I should be really bad. This is horrible Excel form. Kenny would yell at me. And then we can take the minimum debt, the minimum of this number, which is 44, or the P50 debt, which is 40. Interesting. Now, if we would change the uncertainty in the solar to, what was that, 6.5 or whatever we had, and then we look at that, it's still P50 which is driving it. We're not at the P99, and that might well be because of the tax effect. Let's change the tax just for a minute. How interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. Put a zero tax rate in here. And now it's the P99 that's driving it and not the P50, and they're all lower than the amount of debt we get with debt to capital. So if we could do that, now we can do the same thing. We could take the minimum, and I'll show you just a minute. Let me explain why we'll do this. We're now going to take our third method. We're going to take our third method, and which is maybe the debt to capital would apply. And here's when the debt to capital would start to really drive everything, is when you go downstairs and find the required return, and you put something like a 10% return in here. And then in the financial model, we're getting 65 million or whatever that is of debt here, 66 million. And when we put in our debt to capital, we're getting a lower number. So we really should account for the third method. And to get the third method, let's go upstairs and get the total project cost. And after we get the project cost, I'm gonna maybe put it over in this line. Let's get I'm gonna have to do our coloring again, but don't worry about that. Let's get this famous thing. That's why I started this whole video by showing you that term sheet. And if it's confusing to you, I'm really sorry. But that's the way, even for a relatively simple solar project, things work. And we haven't really gone through the big issue, which is if there are circular references in here. This is when Oh, don't crash. Don't crash. Ah! Ooh, shit. F12. Let's put F12 to save as. Ooh, course file with debt. How's that? Okay, and so in this case, here's how you do the what happens is we want to sculpt the debt, but we can't when we sculpt the debt, the DSCR, the key formula is that the NPV of the debt service, and I should have explained that perhaps much better. That's the key formula in this whole thing. The NPV of the debt service is equal to the amount of the debt. In this case, we start with the amount of the debt, which is much less. And then if we take the NPV of the cash flow, not the debt service, and then take that NPV and divide it, you get an implied DSCR, or I call that LLCR because it's constant over time. You get, because it's the NPV of the cash flow divided by the NPV of the debt. You can use that then to get a debt service from your fixed amount. And what we'll do is we'll take the minimum of our cash flow and use that to get our debt service. And our final amount of debt, where was this one? Maybe I'm going to put this over here. Our final amount of debt that we applied is the minimum. Come on. Is the minimum of the debt from the debt to capital or the debt from either of these two. And the final debt service amount applied is the minimum of either this one or the cash flow, the debt service we have from this one, or the minimum debt service we have from our 1.2. And once we have the debt service, then we can make a little debt account. And for the debt account, we make the opening balance equal the prior year closing balance. And then let's add, excuse me, let's add the debt issued. And the debt issued is up here, this one. And then we take the debt repayment, which is going to be the final debt service minus the interest. I'm sorry I'm doing this a little bit backwards, but it is inherently a little bit backwards. The closing balance is opening balance plus the debt issued minus the debt repayment. I keep everything on a positive number basis, and then we get our interest expense as the interest rate multiplied by the opening balance. Okay. And when we do this, I'm totally afraid of this. The debt balance went to zero when it was supposed to be. How beautiful is that? And now let's see, we could be a little fancier, and we could even put what the I can't get a word out now because I'm old. We could put what method is used. That's the word I wanted. And now I'm going to go back upstairs again, and this time I'm going to put a lower required IRR in. And when we do this, we result with the P99 is affecting the debt. Okay, that's the lower of the three. That's why all this uncertainty business can be really, really, really important. And for this final debt that's applied, let's throw it. Now let's take this crap out here and let's put the final debt applied, and hopefully there will be no circular reference. I can't see any, I'm not good, really, really good at this, but shoot, I'm saving it even now. Okay. And then we see how much equity financing there is. And this is what I wanted to do. I lost my train of thought just a little bit. And we still have zero when we use the other debt to capital. And then remember, when we put an income tax rate in, well, the negative income tax kind of helped our case, which we should have maybe put a NOL, a net operating loss, and then now the minimum is the P50 case. And in that P50 case, it didn't work. I oh shit. Okay, let me just pause it for a minute here. Okay. Okay, let's fix what I had fix this so it works in all cases. So the first thing I did was I put a P50, P99, and debt to capital in, and then we selected the minimum. We can really put the minimum of these three, and then we can make a match. When you use the minimum, you can take the match of this one and take these three, and it'll pick 1, 2, 3 if you put a 0 in for an exact match. And then the debt applied will be just an index with the match, which is kind of, for me, old-fashioned. We could have used XLOOKUP to do this whole thing. That would have been a little cooler. If we used XLOOKUP, we could have said, take these, look up on this value against these three values, and take this as the return array, and if it's not found, we can put a 0, but then we get an exact match. We can do it all in one go. Okay, and then on this one, let's use a choose command, choose function once we have this, and we'll go up to, if it's 1, we'll get the debt service. If it's 2, we'll get the debt service from the P99. If it's 3, we get the debt service from the debt to capital. Now, there are a whole lot of, in the real world, this is one of the biggest problems in project finance, to be able to incorporate circular reference related to taxes and interest, circular references related to the DSRA and the interest during construction and the fees during construction. We have changing interest rates, and most importantly, when we compute this debt applied, this DSCR from this method, that's not really how it would work. We might use a curved DSCR. So those are issues that I address elsewhere, and that I really argue to do in any way in a reasonable method. This is where I really, really argue for this UDF thing that I'm working on forever. So now, once we put this in, please, we got to 0 because it was not really taking a minimum of each one. Okay, so now we have our after-tax cash flow, which is always the P50 case. Now we're back to the P50 case, and now we can put our debt service back in here, or we could have even added the interest and the principal from our table. And then now on the net equity cash flow, we put a negative for the amount we put in our sources and uses of funds statement. And then once we did that, then we can compute our equity IRR as the amount we take out of our pocket versus the cash flow we're receiving minus the debt service we've got, and then we put in our IRR, and this is the IRR. Ooh, that's amazing that it's close. Don't worry, we'll change some assumptions and we'll get it all different. Okay, and then we can even put our NPV at the target IRR because we're going to make a goal seek. And one of the most, I say this too many times, one of the most exciting days of my whole life was back in 1990, it must have been 1992, when I made my first macro, and that was a goal seek macro, and that's what we're going to do now. And what we're going to do is set this to 0, and the way we're going to set it to 0 is change this project IRR, which nobody really looks at anyway. I wish they would, but whatever. We're going to change this project IRR, but we're not going to change it here. We're going to change this project IRR over here. I put it in a separate line. And then we might want to change it when we change this. And we got to make sure that if we're on this case, which is number 1, we change it here and we don't change it over here. And I'm a little worried about this one going here. So what we're going to do is have to be a little detailed, let me put it that way, with our analysis. So I'm going to make this, I hope to finish this so we can really talk about it. Now, if we're going to do a goal seek on this one, let's call this NPV target. You have to remember the name, and then you have to tell it to me. You can't tell it to me, right? And then let's call this one temporarily the PIRR. Okay. It didn't matter at all if I made it a capital or not. Totally didn't. So now let's go to our developer, record a macro, call it goal seek or whatever you like, but don't put a space there. And then it's going to be recording. And then we're going to go to the data, and we're going to go to what if analysis, and we're going to go to the goal seek. We're going to set that to 0 by changing over in the other thing, the PIRR, okay? And now what we have, and we better stop recording, stop, okay? And what we have is that we need a 4.98 return. Now, what happens if I put a 0 income tax rate? We'll have to do that macro again. Or what happens if I start changing the tenor? Because I said that really one argument I would make, and I would actually make it kind of strongly, is that you should put a much longer tenor, which implicitly assumes some refinancing. Or what happens if we change the DSCR requirement or the target equity IRR? What's going to happen is all of this stuff can change, and you want to make sure it all works. It all works very well. That was kind of stupid to say. Okay, so now let's look at our macro. And I asked Mike this, and how could we make it so it always just goes back to this? And now every single time it puts this in, and you want to put NPV underscore target. That's what you're going to do. And then it goes to this other sheet. And we don't need to go to the other sheet if we put a range name in it, and you put PIR. And then we can make a little button, I suppose, or you can attach it to this one, or attach it to this one, or attach it to anything, but let's just make a little button and do our goal seek. And now let's change something. Okay, how about this? Because we're going to talk about this so much, let's say we have a consultant, and instead of using 6.5, which results in the method of P50, okay, let's say we put 10% in, which is a number that you might see in wind. And then we've got P99. And then if we have P99, our IRR is here. And let's put our project IRR. So we, not IFF, IRR. So you can really kind of see what's happening. And our project IRR is, I'll find it. And we've got our target IRR here. And let's also put our LCOE. Now, I'm sure this one, the effect on the LCOE will not be big for this one, okay? And you could say that, you're making much ado about just about nothing. But people do get excited about this, and I suppose we could fudge it around so it really would make a pretty big difference. So let's take this number and let's multiply it by 1,000, right? So that's our cost. So now when we change that DSCR, we just put well, I didn't put the word target here appropriately. So, okay. And then we run it. You can run it like this. And then I didn't put my single quote. What's the matter with me? There's a lot wrong with me. And I didn't name this range. I didn't select this and name this range. My God, am I screwed up today. Let's just see if we can, excuse me, stop it and run it. Okay. Oh, it was out here. Let me see if I can run it. Now it worked. And because of the change, we had a change in the IRR. Let's put it back. Let's put the solar thing and only make it 3%. Let's make the uncertainty only 3%. Then we run the goal seek, and it changes it. Okay. Not a gigantic amount, but it does change it. And of course, if you change the equity IRR, that will change it as well. Now let's just do one more kind of Excel-ish thing. And this time, instead of wanting to only change this one number up here in the project IRR, up here, let's make this whole thing a range name. And now, if let's do this, Control and F3, let's delete this one. Or instead of this, why don't we just take this one and select the whole thing all the way across. So now that's a range name that is a long range name. And we do want to make that change. And then let's, before, you know what I'm going to do is up here, I'm going to tell us, right now it's running with P50 because we have not enough. let's put 7% back here. It's still running with P50. That's interesting. But the just a minute. Okay, I put P9. I put a much higher uncertainty in here to force it to run with P99, and we get a difference, and we want to rerun the goal seek, and now you just do it like this, and you put project IRR, but then you put a range. No, you put the cells, and then you remember that range. It had one row, but the index number was the range of a scenario number. Okay, so that's how you would do that one. And let's just go up here and make this arranged name and call it scenario. And let's see if this works. Okay, so now it's P99 debt. Let's take the Saudi one, and then it's P99 debt, and we're aiming for this. We only got 16, and but for the Saudi debt, let's say that we are a little more aggressive, and we put a 25-year period. And now we're still at P99, and let's say that because of competition, we're going to accept 7%. Okay, and now we're still at P99, and we run the goal seek, and it says we can get this to work at 5.9% IRR, and we go upstairs, and we look at our IRR, and it put the 5.29. Now, what I've been arguing, let's put the second one in just as an example. Okay, we can do this with all of them. And we could even, if we want, we could even just run this goal seek macro whenever we change that. So if I now, I do that, it's going to put the required return to get all this to work. And let's go back to our Saudi for a minute. And in our Saudi one, let's put back to, let's say we get our consultants to give us a 5% IRR. Then we're back to our P50 case, and we're all the way down to 4.96. But let's say in the second one, we're going to assume refinancing. Now, we could put refinancing in an all fancy way, but we have up here somewhere the life of our project is 30, and we're going to put 30 as the debt tenor, which kind of, not perfectly, but basically assumes we refinance and refinance and refinance. Then we've got a positive NPV, and we can do our goal seek, and we get down to an LCOE of 20. Illustrates that the financing and the ROE and all that is important. Now, just to review, if we could have gone up here and really used a corporate finance technique. And this is kind of interesting. When we used a corporate finance technique, we got a little bit different of an IRR. Well, in here, I had an 8%. So let's put 8% into our equity up here. And maybe the debt size is a little bit different because we're doing it, let's put 75% debt, and we get a very similar number. We wouldn't have had to do any of this. We wouldn't have had to do any of this stuff. I wanted to show you how this works so you can see it. If I was doing a first kind of cut, I think it would be probably better, and I can't call this whack. I've got to call this after. Yes, I'll call it whack for now. Okay, all right, and that's what we're going to do now. I'm going to uh, uh, stop recording this video, but before I stop recording this video, I'm just going to tell you, I hope you can see how this P90 and P50 and P99 come into play, and we've got to study this uncertainty in the solar a little bit more. And I think we've got to look and see how people come up with capacity factors and what kind of uncertainties, let me put it that way, could there be in the resource analysis itself. So I'm going to try to make a video right now to follow this up. I'm kind of sick of it, but I'm going to do it.